Today, I suspect we're going to hear a certain degree of similarity in some of the speeches because the issues are relatively similar. We'll have slightly different approaches to them. I'm very happy to echo my friend, the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead's comments about the Joint Select Committee report, which the Honourable Member for Dulwich and West Norwood played a sort of educating role for me, coming from the work and pensions side of it. And of course it was the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead who talked me into taking up something that was outside the comfort zone of work and pensions' normal remit. So it was a fascinating experience. And I think, although the Honourable Member for Sheffield South East, in his introductory remarks, suggested that the aim of the Joint Select Committee's report was to make government feel uncomfortable, actually that wasn't, I'm afraid, my objective at all, which I felt our job was really to try and come up with solutions for what has been, for a long time, a pretty difficult issue. And if one needed, in a sense, confirmation of that, there was some interesting, amongst the various emails that we get from various charities and lobbying groups, I thought there was an interesting comment from the charity Homeless Link, who said, and I quote, "They recognise the challenge facing policymakers. It's a hugely complex sector, making finding solutions equally complex. However, supported housing provides a lifeline for thousands of vulnerable people, and therefore it's imperative that we get it right." Unquote. Now, Chairman, I think all of us would absolutely agree with every word of that. And they then go on to say that, quote, "they welcome the government's commitments around homelessness and rough sleeping," unquote. Now, that is a very promising start. And in the brief from the Honourable Member for Sheffield South East's Committee, the Communities and Local Government Select Committee, the brief highlights, absolutely rightly, the areas where both the joint report and the CLG Select Committee, and indeed the wider sector, are very supportive of the initial report made by the government in October 2017 in response to our recommendations in April. And it's just worth recapping, I think the crucial one really is that the government has decided not to apply LHA rates to tenants in supported housing. It was a clear recommendation in our report, arguably the single most important one, and I welcome, and I hope that all honourable members and right honourable members here today likewise do so, I welcome the government's response in October. And at that time, the member for Nuneaton, who was the minister for this portfolio then, made it clear that, broadly speaking, the government's response built on precisely the report that we had submitted. Now, both of my predecessors speaking today have highlighted that there is still some concern about what I would call the issue of the guarantee. I got an email, for example, from Joe Feely, the Chief Executive of Emmaus in Gloucestershire, who, by the way, do an outstanding job for those that they are helping. And he says, quote, "Although the proposals state that funding for supported housing costs would be ring-fenced, we're concerned that in the long term this is difficult to guarantee." And the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead made precisely the same point. I think philosophically, Mr. Sharma, we might all take the view that it is pretty difficult for any government to guarantee everything forever. But I think it would be helpful today if the new minister could share with us some reassurance, both to Emmaus and to members across the House, about the way in which supported housing costs will be ring-fenced, and that the government's intention to continue that throughout the life of this Parliament anyway. Of course, I'll give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, because I'm here specifically to speak on Emmaus. One of Emmaus's concerns is that they may be limited to the 2-year period of funding, and it would be so helpful if the Minister confirmed today that although we can't have an open-ended commitment, that it is a lot longer than 2 years.
Well, I'm grateful for her intervention, because clearly the 2-year issue is one aspect of it, but I think the wider issue is probably around the definition of short term. And again, that has been raised already. I had an interesting briefing from Rethink Mental Illness, who, again, I quote, warmly welcome the decision not to proceed with the LHA cap and to place long-term supported housing funding on a sustainable footing, unquote. But they do go on to raise concerns about some of the proposals for short-term supported housing, normally defined, I think, as being under 2 years. And I think that seems to be the issue that concerns them and other mental health organisations. There's a joint letter they've issued with 9 other organisations, which really is to try and tie down a little bit the definition of short-term and very short-term. And I hope the Minister may be able to share some light with us on this, although I do think that all of us will have to bear in mind that I think the consultation closes on the 23rd of January. It's going to be difficult for the government to say too much in advance of that, so I'm assuming that the main part of the purpose for this debate, in a sense, is to try and get our points in clearly before the government's response to the consultation, which no doubt will include some of these points from different charities. Anyway, of course, I give way.
I'm very grateful for the honour giving way. On this key point, if you're in the Treasury, you want to control everything and you want to ring-fence funds that can only be used and nothing can be breached above that. But we need to get over to Treasury Ministers, and I'm sure the Minister today would wish to do that, and therefore this is supportive to her case to the Treasury. But so many of the people we're talking about, if the funds run out, their need is still there. And it does seem to me this group of people, we should be having demand-led expenditure, not Treasury-capped and controlled expenditure. So the idea we would be excluding people who are amongst the most vulnerable in our society because their money had run out seems to me absurd and wrong.
Well, he does make his point with his usual passion. I don't think I'm going to really try and offer a sort of lecture to the Treasury on how they should provide and quantify the amounts of money for particular parts of the supported housing provision that the government is looking at reshaping. I think at this stage, what we're trying to do is register our concerns, as he has done, on some aspects of the supported housing report that we feel isn't yet reflected in the government's position, and encourage them, when looking at the responses to the consultation, where all these points will no doubt come up, to think widely, and this is the great advantage of the Minister in her new role, to think widely about what she knows from her experience and what other members will share today from our experiences about what actually works best on the ground. And that, Mr. Sharma, in a sense, brings me on to the last main point I want to raise, which is the business of domestic violent refugees. And I think there are 2 really good points that have been made today. The first one is, which came from the Honourable Member for Sheffield South East, is that there is, in a sense, a slight difference about domestic violence refugees because, of course, in many cases, the individuals want to be out of the area, not just the parish that my friend the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead referred to, but quite often outside the constituency in which it happens. But it won't, of course, always be the same constituency that they want to go to. They will want to move to different places, probably depending not least on where their family links are. I can recall easily a woman fleeing from stalking in my constituency who wanted to be very far away, indeed, partly because of her fear about the individual who'd stalked her, but partly also because she wanted to go to a place where her mother was, with whom she could stay with young children and have that additional family support and all the rest of it. So there is an issue, I think, not just about the funding or having a national network, but also about access, about how practically it works. If somebody wants to move, for the sake of argument, from Gloucester to Birkenhead in order to have the advantages of family links there, fleeing from domestic violence situation, how is that actually going to work in practice? Because I can imagine that access to this could be difficult. And the Honourable Member for South Derbyshire, the new Minister, I know has experience of domestic violence refugees. I think I'm right in saying that she helped set up one in her own constituency. And there is that side of the argument is about the importance of localisation, which, again, the Honourable Member for Sheffield South East did mention. Actually, these things very often are done best on the ground by people who know how to do them. Bishop Rachel of Gloucester, in her new role, has very much championed a refuge which the diocese has effectively provided in the centre of our city. And that's a really good example of a local initiative, which I certainly wouldn't want to see ruled out as a result of having a very top-down approach led by the man or woman in Whitehall knows best. Of course I'll give way.
I thank him for giving way. I do believe, and I hope he will agree, that it is important that actually the full cost is met so that local authorities do not then end up with a shortfall. So for me, as a spokesperson for local government, this is the most important call that I have, that local government then doesn't end up with a shortfall.
Well, I quite understand where the honourable member is coming from. That's always going to be a concern for all of us, and the Minister, from her previous experience of running a local council, will know that that is always a concern of local governments, about money and the balance, and no doubt she will say something on that. So, Mr. Sharma, let me conclude by really saying that I think the spirit of everyone who's come to this debate is open. It's warm-hearted, it is not party political, it's about finding a solution to a difficult problem that has plagued successive governments for some time, and for which there probably will never be an absolutely perfect remedy, not least because there will never be an unlimited supply of money, whatever my friend's optimism in changing the Treasury's way of doing things. But what we can do, I think, is explore more these areas where the report made recommendations to which the government has not offered a complete response yet. No doubt he's waiting for the results of the consultation to do so, and where we can perhaps encourage the Minister to share with us some of her early thinking today. And let me finish by perhaps asking her two specific questions. The first one then is about domestic violence refuges. Could she share with us a little bit her own experience and her instincts about the balance of local initiatives, charitable, faith-led organisations that want to create refuges locally for those people who are happy to actually stay within a constituency, and then the wider issue of how we help those who want to actually be a long way away and how they're going to have access to refuges elsewhere. So that would be my first question. The second one then is about young people in supported housing, because some of them are put off from looking for work because of the high rents and sometimes the impact of short-term employment on their benefits. Could she share with us what she thinks the new funding model might do to change this and give more support to such young people? Thank you.